rockier, to record them playing live in a room together.
No overdubs, yeah.
It embodies the ethos of what the Get Back sessions were meant to be.
A really sort of classic guitar piece of music. It's really making use of the guitar as a way of writing. As you said, it's based around this blues riff.
And then enter Billy Preston on keyboards, whose contribution can never be underestimated.
Definitely, and it was Billy Preston's arrival that really galvanised it and brought it to life.
And then they finally just go, oh, we're just going to play on the roof.
Yeah.
But it's become such an iconic image in itself.
I'd won tickets to wherever the show was supposed to be, which never happened.
I felt like the Beatles kind of wanted the drama of the police stopping them, because as we see in the Get Back series, Paul actually suggests, I assume it seriously, that they perform in the House of Commons, and they should somehow just get in there, perform until they get dragged away.
There's one or two people I've met who even managed to get on the roof or very nearby, but climbing up buildings.
And at the time, did it feel like the Beatles were going out with a bang or with a bit of a whimper?
People were saying, well, that's actually the Beatles' cardboard tombstone.
It's a cold January in 1969. Richard Nixon is sworn in as the 37th President of the United States of America. The hugely successful Manchester United manager, Matt Busby, announces his retirement, handing over duties to reserve manager Wilf McGuinness at the end of the season. An Ariana Afghan Airways flight crashes into a house near Gatwick Airport amid heavy fog, killing 48 passengers and 2 on the ground. And Scottish band Marmalade are at #1 with their cover of the Beatles' Obla Dee Obla Da. Meanwhile, John, Paul, George and Ringo are rehearsing in Twickenham Film Studios ahead of a planned live performance to mark their new album, but the tensions are rife within the band. This is UnBeatled, the show where each episode we delve deep into one song recorded by the Fab Four. With the help of an expert, we examine the history, writing, recording and impact of the song, while our resident musician unpicks the lyrics and music. I'm joined by Beatles expert and music industry insider David Stark, a musician and Fab Four fanatic Dave Bennett. So please me and like, subscribe and comment to UnBeatled with Donnie Campbell on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Today we break down I've Got a Feeling from the album Let It Be. David, Let It Be, the Beatles' final released album, but not their final recorded album.
That's true.
Was that bittersweet?
It was a bit because, well, we knew it was coming. We knew, obviously, that they'd filmed and recorded all the songs back in, as you say, January '69. But then they went back into the studio to do the Abbey Road album, which, thanks to great songs, great production by George Martin, and the technology to 8-track, became, for me, their masterpiece album. Really, couldn't have been better. And then, so Let It Be came out in May 1970, literally just after they'd split up. And the film was premiered on May the 20th, 1970. I was there. And the album, it was like, well, they kind of dolled it up with a cardboard box and an incredible book of photos and text, all the dialogue from the film. It was a wonderful package. I got it the day of release. So they were I think they knew it wasn't quite up to their normal standard, the whole album. So they were doing their best to give the fans value for money.
And at the time, did it feel like the Beatles were going out with a bang or with a bit of a whimper?
It was a little bit of a whimper. It was slightly anticlimactic. I mean, it's a good album, but it's not their best. And the songs on it, there's some really, obviously you've got Let It Be on it, and I've Got a Feeling, which was, it was a great rocker, but it was like, okay, it's good, but it was, you couldn't call it classic Beatles. But even though it's a great number to play, and I still love hearing it, and hearing Paul play it today, fantastic. But it's not one you think of automatically.
No, it's not, that's a good point. Although, as we'll speak about it later, Paul McCartney loves to play it live. But, Dave, I've Got a Feeling, it's still a great track, and it's got that, it embodies the ethos of what the Get Back sessions were meant to be when they're in Twickenham, which was to go back to the roots, to be rockier, to record them playing live in a room together.
No overdubs, yeah.
No overdubs,
that was the
exactly.
plan, yeah.
That was sort of the plan.
Yeah.
And what grabs you, and I've got a feeling initially, that
Well, what's interesting about the song is that it's the last occasion, or certainly one of the last, where John and Paul were really both contributing to a song. And in the style that they so often did, which was where one of them would provide a middle eight. And in this example, the middle eight, which is the Everyone's Had a Hard Year bit, which John provides, was already a pre-existing song or song fragment that John had. And John and Paul worked out that they could lay the two songs together. And of course, later in the song, we have that fantastic moment where we have that counterpoint where John is singing his Everybody's Had a Hard Year, whilst Paul is doing I've Got a Feeling over the same bit of music, and they weave together beautifully. But what's really interesting is there's this early clip of John playing his fragment of I've Had a Hard Year, which was originally over slightly different chords. And in fact, it was over a guitar part which John had either already used or was about to already use for another song. And it sounded like this. Everybody's has a hard year. Everybody let their hair down. Everybody had a wet dream. So the guitar part originally underneath, which you may already be able to recognise, was Julia. So we don't really know the full timeline, but either Everyone's Had a Hard Year started as part of Julia or was related to Julia, but it found its way eventually into this song and took on quite a different form.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that's 1968 for John was a hard year. And he might have written it over the Julia chords, but it stayed with him. For John Lennon in 1968, he was arrested for drug possession. He divorced Cynthia finally, and he got addicted to heroin. So we can see the reason he would say that, but he does it in a classic Lennon twist with a smirk.
Yeah.
Of saying, pull your socks up, let your hair down, sort of relax, get on with it.
Yeah,
sort of like a British stiff upper lip in a way.
Yeah, they're good lyrics.
Yeah.
They fit in very well with the song. That whole sequence is it's a great, as you say, it's a great collaboration. John and Paul, as you say, probably their last collaboration on a song.
Yeah, and in that regard, even though this song isn't the most well-remembered Beatles song, it makes it quite an important landmark in their career as that final occasion of pure collaboration, which I think is why it's so nice that now in Paul's live set, he includes that moment where, using the isolated vocal of John Lennon's part, he effectively duets with John Lennon, which is so beautiful.
So at this time, Paul and John aren't collaborating much because tensions are so high within the band. They've decamped to Twickenham Film Studios to film them writing and recording their next album, which would then be presented with a live show. And there's talk of whether the live show will be in, is it Lebanon? In a
Tripoli.
Tripoli.
Yeah.
Tripoli in an arena or somewhere. You know, and as I've mentioned before, I'd won tickets to wherever the show was supposed to be, which never happened, of course.
Well, there was all these ideas, and it was the director of the Let It Be film who was really pushing them to go abroad somewhere, make it a real spectacle. And yeah, maybe that would have been quite a good finale for the Beatles, an epic final concert. But they were so tired of all of this nonsense, and particularly Ringo didn't want to go abroad again.
Yeah. And also in the context of them recording, as we know, going into the cold Twickenham Film Studios and early January '69, just weeks after they've released the Beatles' Double, the White Album, you know, a double album full of fantastic songs, and you know they're just expected to continue, you know, the progression of at that time an album every 6 months virtually.
Yeah.
And the White Album is where we start to see these tensions bubbling over.
Yeah.
Ringo leaves the band during recording. John, Paul and George at points become three separate artists.
Yeah.
Creating in different rooms in Abbey Road Studios.
That is definitely when the
pulling it all
breakdown
together.
started.
And George at this time is feeling a little bit ignored perhaps. His songs aren't getting the recognition that he feels they deserve. John and Paul are strained. I think definitely John being a little bit absent during the start of recording, maybe to do with his drug addiction at the time. Paul feel like he's driving the group after the death of Brian Epstein and maybe becoming wearing on his fellow band members.
Yeah, and all these tensions you can see in the Get Back, Peter Jackson's amazing 7-hour Odyssey, really, which, it's unbelievable that it was all filmed.
Yeah.
Even the secret conversations or secret camera. Yeah. It's just incredible.
And throw into the mix business meetings and badly run businesses, especially Apple Corps, hemorrhaging money. So all this time, these are all contributing factors to a strained creative.
It makes you think, if the Beatles weren't put under such ridiculous pressure, that Get Back project, they're meant to come up with a whole album in the course of 2 weeks and then record it live. It's absurd. It's never going to happen. But then they did create some fantastic songs, even if it was difficult to get to that point sometimes. So if they had been given free rein and all the time in the world, would the music have suffered? Would they have got lazy? Who knows? It's hard to tell.
But as we can see in the film, it was Paul who was always the main driver, wanted to do stuff, just wanted to, record, write songs, get them done, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
And and it's a great rock, and maybe not an absolute classic, but in the film we remember the Rooftop version of it, where that's a highlight of the film, really.
Yeah, it's a song written to be performed live, which is the whole point of that project, and it works.
And Paul's version, we've spoken about John's, but Paul's half of the song, or maybe 75% of the song, if you can say that, is sort of a blues guitar lick. I've got a feeling and feeling deep inside. They're not very specific lyrics, but we can probably assume that he's speaking to his girlfriend at the time, Linda Eastman, who he goes on to marry, obviously, especially in the section that goes, all these years I've been wandering around, wondering how come nobody told me all that I've been looking for was somebody who looked like you.
Yeah.
So we've got Paul's relationship blossoming at this time, again, leading to more tension because Linda was present, Yoko's present, yet Maureen and Patty are not because they're used to the old way of working for the Beatles, which was no girlfriends, no wives.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a rocker with Linda Eastman in mind.
Yeah.
And as we said, they descend on Twickenham, they arrive there, and they just start running the song.
Yeah.
And they just start rehearsing.
Yeah, and I think it was one of the few songs that they had semi-formed turning up. You can see in the Get Back film, once they get through that one, they lose a bit of momentum because now they're trying to write and arrange and practice all at the same time. But yeah, this song is a really sort of classic guitar piece of music. It's really making use of the guitar as a way of writing. As you said, it's based around this blues riff, which is ultimately an A major chord with the high A on top as well, and then we just add in this extra little shaping. And then later we get some really kind of cool bluesy moments where they take an A7 shape. And we have that moment later on at the end where which is the same A7 shape, but like thrown out another way. So it's very guitar focused. It is them getting back to their roots of being a guitar band.
And then enter Billy Preston on keyboards to
bring
make
it to
the
life.
whole thing lift up a level as well.
100%.
Whose contribution can never be underestimated.
Definitely, and it's a shame really in the Rooftop Concert, he's almost framed. It's almost framed to try and keep him out of the limelight. And fair enough, it's about the Beatles, but as we saw in the Get Back series, it was Billy Preston's arrival that really galvanised it and brought it to life.
Yeah, and great piano parts.
Really great.
Electric piano he played on.
Yeah, the Fender Rhodes, and he is, the Beatles are fantastic songwriters, but they've only ever been sort of, good musicians. They weren't incredibly sort of highly skilled musicians. Whereas Billy Preston was a very highly skilled keyboard player and could bring some really clever and shiny parts to these songs.
Mm-hmm. Well, they've rehearsed the song so many times, as you see in the Get Back documentary.
Yeah.
It's when Billy comes that they really sort of the mood lightens.
Yeah.
I think just having someone there. And George quite often asks Paul and John, maybe we should get someone in. He mentions Bob Dylan at one point. He mentions Eric Clapton coming in. You can see Paul and John going, no, I'm not having that. But then Billy Preston, who they'd met while performing in Hamburg, while Billy Preston, I believe, was on tour with Little Richard.
Little Richard, yeah.
Was it Little Richard?
I think, and also, they knew him from the Hamburg days, and he was a great player. They actually had worked with Eric Clapton, of course, on While My Guitar Gently Weeps on the White Album. But then, George went to see Ray Charles at the Festival Hall, and Billy Preston was playing with him. So he got, so he reconnected with Billy, and it was after then he suggested bringing Billy into the sessions. And I believe this was the first number they did together. Yeah. And I think at the end of the first take, John says, "You're in the band."
Yeah, 100%. It was meant to be. It really did bring them together. And that was the problem they were having, is they were trying to go back to their roots, but they got used to being able to overdub and have these extra elements. And now it sounded so much weaker. Their sound had lost something because they didn't have the extra things like the keyboards. So they needed that fifth band member to carry it.
And Billy on the keys, what's he doing that's... What little flourishes and nuances is he adding to the music?
So Billy is playing a Fender Rhodes, which is a electric piano. It's not digital, it's not like a synthesizer. It's almost like what the electric guitar is to the acoustic guitar, the Rhodes, the electric piano, is to the traditional acoustic piano. So it sounds a little bit like this. It's just doing some very typical blues work. Very kind of, almost like you can imagine it being quite gospel-y. And we can hear that across the Let It Be album. It's the same type of playing, but it really just is exactly what they needed. That extra flavour in there.
And you can hear George Harrison with his lead guitar playing off Billy. Very much they're locked in, they're in sync.
Yeah, well, the Beatles were always massive fans of blues music, of R&B, and Billy really knew that stuff. So he was sort of really bringing out the best in the band.
He was an artist in his own right.
Yeah.
He had lots on organ as well. He was very well known for that.
So he goes on to play, I know, on Plastic Ono Band, John Lennon's first solo record. Yeah. Billy's on the piano for many of the songs.
And he's on Abbey Road as well on a couple of the tracks. So that was in '69. So so it was great that they brought him in, and he's the only person credited on a Beatles record as an additional performer. He's the only person ever to be credited. The Beatles and Billy Preston.
Yeah.
And then moving on to the lyrics now. It's not a huge amount to say about these lyrics. If you compare it to, let's say, Penny Lane or Strawberry Fields Forever, we've got Paul's lines, as we said, about how he's finally met someone like Linda. And we've got John Lennon's "Everybody had a good year, everybody had a hard time, everybody had a wet dream, everybody saw the sunshine." It's a little... John Lennon's is maybe saying he had a hard year, but he's using cliches and jokes and sort of making fun of that British stiff upper lip to sort of say, pull the socks up, let your hair down, put your foot down. Yeah,
and I think John was often just going for things that kind of sounded good. He didn't want to read too much into meaning sometimes. Like everyone had a wet dream. It's like he's obviously getting it in there just as a bit of a gag. And you can feel the personality switch as you go from Paul's section to John's section there. We suddenly feel like we're in a John song in that moment.
And they've got to talk about the Rooftop Concert.
Well, yeah.
They play this twice on the Rooftop Concert.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. They did 2 takes of it, and it was a cold day, January '69. It's amazing that it came out as well as it did. All the songs they played before they stopped. But also got to say, great drumming by Ringo. Great lead by George in terrible circumstances, really.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I always knew about the Rooftop performance as their last performance.
Yeah.
I never realised as a kid that was first and foremost a recording session, that they were effectively recording a live album, which of course makes sense when they performed the same song twice. which you wouldn't do at a normal concert. But as you said, it's amazing how good it sounds for a reasonably improvised situation on the roof in very cold weather.
And everything on the roof being tie-lined down to the studio, Apple studio down in the basement.
Yeah.
So it was a big operation.
Yeah.
And my pal Dave Harris was one of the engineers that day, and he's told me what a headache it was, especially as the roof itself had to be reinforced because it just wasn't strong enough to hold all those amount of people. It could have collapsed at any time.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, it's funny, in the end, the rooftop was meant to be sort of an easy solution. They spent weeks deciding where it will be, and then like, oh, let's just do it on the roof here.
Yeah, exactly.
But of course, it wasn't easy. They had all this preparation had to be done still.
Yeah, they had plans to do this amazing showcase concert. They ended up leaving Twickenham Studios, which they originally thought they could do it there,
Yeah.
to camp to the basement of their office building.
Yeah.
Becomes a little bit more homely. Tensions start to maybe alleviate a little bit. And then they finally just go, oh, we're just going to play on the roof.
Yeah.
But it becomes such an iconic image in itself. Like when you think of famous concerts throughout time, you think of maybe Elton John at the was it LA Dodgers Stadium. You think of Pink Floyd at Pompeii, Oasis at Nebworth. The Beatles have many, but one of them is just that.
It is an
concert
iconic
show.
image people recognise
Yeah,
immediately. And it does make sense. They were recording down in the basement in the Apple studios, which was a good studio back in those days. And it does make sense that, oh, okay, let's do the concert upstairs on the roof.
Yeah,
it does,
And it brings traffic to a standstill. Everyone comes out their offices, start looking up to this music that they can hear but they can't see.
Yeah.
Police officers get deployed. They turn up to Apple Studios. I think they kind of realise what's happening. Apple members of staff stall them.
It's funny, isn't it?
And the police officers, all being young men, don't want to leave. They're fans of the Beatles themselves.
Yeah. And I've often wondered that the people who could hear it on the street obviously couldn't see it because it's many stories up. Did they even realise it was the Beatles? Because they're not playing familiar Beatles tunes.
No, but a lot of them did because they knew what the building was.
Right,
And then there's quite a lot of... There's one or two people I've met who even managed to get on the roof or very nearby by climbing up buildings, just jumping across.
Yeah.
And like, so people knew it was... Most people knew it was the Beatles.
Right,
So
yeah.
like, lunchtime at the end of January in the cold. How insane is that?
Yeah.
And then the police, we'll quickly go through it, the police finally get to see it. They get up to the roof after a bit of stalling from Mal Evans, their roadie, and many other things. But they don't want to stop it.
No,
because they want to watch this iconic historical moment.
They were scared also. They're going to stop history.
Yeah.
Really, they didn't know it was going to be their last performance.
Yeah.
And one of the young policemen, his name is Ray Dagg. He's still with us today, and he's spoken about it. And I think he was, quite. He was trying to do his job, but he knew they'd be in big trouble if they did stop the concert.
Well, ironically, I felt like the Beatles kind of wanted the drama of the police stopping them because, as we see in the Get Back series, Paul actually suggests, I assume seriously, that they perform in the House of Commons and they should somehow just get in there, perform until they get dragged away, and it would create such a scene.
But in the end, they actually collaborate with the police, and the police almost say like, just finish within a reasonable amount of time, and we won't break this up. But Ringo being Ringo, he's complaining that he's not hauled off his drums. And in a classic showcase of each of their characters, Paul goes up and apologises to the police, saying sorry about that, but thank you for letting us finish. John and George don't speak to the police officers, and Ringo comes over and starts joking with them, saying, I'll go quietly. And then the recordings from the rooftop are brought together to create the Let It Be mix that we know. Two versions, the two performances they recorded on the rooftop that day are moulded together by Phil Spector to create the version.
Initially by Glyn Johns, who was asked to put the album. I mean, the album was shelved basically. In '69 they did a bit of work on it. It was shelved for the best part of the year. And I'm reading in the Beatles Monthly what's happening with these recordings. We eventually find out in 1970. But Glyn Johns was first approached to do it. Then his production was put aside, and then they brought in, Alan Klein brought in Phil Spector to work on it, mainly because Alan Klein managed him as well. So there's a close connection there. And of course, Mr. McCartney was not happy about that.
No, of course, he did not like the arrangements
the
that Phil
arrangements,
Spector
the
added to
sounds.
his...
There's lots of sort of slapback delays and echoes on it, which, sometimes I think are actually quite tasteful, but all in all, the Let It Be Naked album that they did years later, where they remixed it, trying to un-Phil Spector it, I actually do prefer many of those.
That's
mixes.
the version that Paul always wanted, isn't it? You can imagine him trying to push through the Let It Be Naked album. But it's interesting though, because Paul hated it, but he was such a big fan of Phil Spector. They all were back in the early days. They loved bands like the Ronettes.
Especially John and George, who used him on their later solo albums.
All Things Must Pass and Plastic Ono Band and Imagine.
Imagine,
So it's finally released, as you said, in May 1970. And it sort of marks, as we mentioned earlier, their last true collaboration between John and Paul.
Well, that's it. And the song stands the test of time, as Paul is still singing it today and doing a fantastic job on stage. So he still loves to play it, still sounds great, and especially when he's duetting, as you said, with John's vocal,
which is just so lovely.
Separated. So and being on the last released album, it's a nice thing for him to do. But the album, when it came out, it was regarded because it came out. The box set was a big black box set with the album and the book, the Let It Be book. So people were saying, well, that's actually the Beatles' cardboard tombstone.
Right.
That's how it was considered at the time, to a degree. And even though we'd had Abbey Road, a few months earlier, this was like, this is the Beatles saying, this is really the end. It was, and they just split up. And John had actually left in September '69, but they kept it secret until Paul decides to bring his solo album out, and then that really marked the end of the Beatles.
Speaking of Paul's solo album, Maybe I'm Amazed on that McCartney 1, I find this song to be a precursor to Maybe I'm Amazed.
Yes, vocally, very much.
Vocally,
At the top end,
And the topic, I suppose, of Linda, or the thought process behind the writing. Speaking to Linda.
I think you're right.
And then just speaking of this collaboration and the camaraderie that we see in Get Back at points, I think can also brush over the fact that they really didn't get on that well. I think they maybe played up to the cameras a wee bit, but there was signs there or showcases of brotherly love, etc.
Oh, I think so,
Why do you think Paul plays this live? Quite often.
I think Paul's set in general is more focused on the rockers. I think he likes the idea of putting on a rock show. And you see that with the choices he makes from his Wings catalogue as well. And this is a rocker that was built for purpose, built for live performance. So it goes down really well live. So although he has more iconic Beatles tracks like Yesterday, which maybe people would like to hear, they're not as energetic.
I think it's in the same league as he likes to play Let Me Roll It from Band on the Run. It's got that kind of rocky feel. It's the same kind of thing, basically. And he just, it's a good one for him to sing, and he can, stretch out on the middle eight.
I can't believe he can still do that, let alone back in '69. It's an amazing vocal performance.
And since the Get Back documentary, where they extracted John Lennon's voice using AI, and he's been able to play it live and duet it with John, which we all saw back in December 2024 when we went to see Paul McCartney, and he duetted with John, or like he did at Glastonbury.
It's such a lovely moment. But the thing is, we have isolated vocal recordings of many Beatles songs. We don't need AI to create it, but I think that the opportunity here was we also, unlike most late Beatles songs, we have video of John performing this vocal, not just the audio. So they could have the video on screen, they can have the isolated vocal, And yeah, for a split second, it feels like he's suddenly back in the
You're
room.
right. No, it's a nice thing to do. So maybe a little bit forced, but it's kind of in the same league as you get Elvis concerts with Elvis's band, and they've isolated Elvis's voice to sing along with the band, and the same with Sinatra as well. So it's kind of falls into that territory. But I think it's great that Paul's done it as a tribute to John as well.
Do you think he likes to showcase that John and him did get on despite all the things that are said about them?
Yeah, without doubt.
Because we think of the Let It Be sessions, the Get Back sessions, as just this horrible time, which wasn't helped by the film, which didn't portray Paul in a great light, the Let It Be film when it came out in 1970. And I think he was damaged by that after, in the years after it, in the 70s, of sort of, John was able to be outspoken in interviews. Paul isn't like that as a character. So he wasn't really able to sort of speak up in the same way that John could, which was a bit flippant and a bit, a little bit arrogant in ways. That,
John just,
do you think this gets to help rehabilitate Paul a little bit, the Get Back sessions, and be like, oh, Paul really was just trying to keep them together?
Yeah, well, I think the Get Back sessions, they're hours and hours long, the Peter Jackson cut. And because we have that extra time, the extra screen time, we can see more context, and we get the moments where Paul is he's exacerbated by having to be the boss. He doesn't want to be the boss, but something has to happen. And yeah, we get a much better insight into what Paul was going through in those moments.
Clearly the driving force.
Yeah, but I also think with the Get Back sessions, which they're not just writing all the songs for what became the Let It Be album, originally titled Get Back, but they're also writing most of the songs for Abbey Road during that time. So that, and then obviously they went into the studio to do Abbey Road and made an incredible job. And then after that, they think, oh, what we're going to do about all those songs we recorded in January and were never finished, never mixed, whatever. So it was all done as a bit of an afterthought, but they knew they had to release the songs contractually anyway. And they did the best job they could with it, I think.
Well, I love the song. And my favourite version, just before we finish, is the anthology version. They do a great recording. And it was great to see, actually, another point about the Get Back show or TV show was them playing the song and them having a bit of fun, and Paul goes, "It keeps me on my toes," and then John goes, "On your what?" Those are the little great moments that make you smile as a fan, really.
The energy,
some great lines in that whole thing, and which in that Let It Be book, they've republished the entire dialogue in the film as well, in the studio, on the roof. Everything's in the book. You can read it as well as see it.
We hope you've enjoyed the show. We're sorry, but it's time to go. Now make sure to subscribe to UnBeatled on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to never miss an episode. Thank you to David and Dave for joining me today. The only thing that's left for you to do is sit back, put on the record, relax and float downstream, as John said. We'll see you next time for She's Leaving Home, a song inspired by a story of a runaway teenager in the newspapers.